And now for something completely different. Hello, my name is Wolfgang, and welcome to Wolfie Makes a Presentational Documentary on Civilian Airships in the 1920s and 1930s. Catchy title, I know. I am no historian, nor professional. I'm not even particularly literate on the topic. What I am is someone who has been fascinated with airships for years. This video is my attempt to share that passion in a way that's hopefully enlightening, maybe entertaining. Plenty of the things I will mention in this video could be their own 30-minute deep dives, but I'm not here to cover every single airship. This is about the tidbits that got me hooked. The moments, machines, and people that sparked something in me as a kid. The story that led to those massive floating liners like the Hindenburg starts way earlier than most people think. This story begins with a man named Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin. Born July 8th, 1838, Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, otherwise known in German as Ferdinand Adolf Heinrich August Graf von Zeppelin, was a German army officer. He served in the cavalry in the army of the Kingdom of Württemberg, achieving the rank of lieutenant general. After he retired, he was granted an honorary promotion, General of the Cavalry. In the late 19th century, he became obsessed with the idea of controlled, long-range flight. Inspired by balloon reconnaissance during the American Civil War, and frustrated with the limitations of free-floating balloons, he envisioned a new kind of aircraft, one that was steerable, structured, and capable of carrying massive loads over vast distances. So here is a very brief timeline before we get into the meat and potatoes. In 1895, and granted in 1899, Zeppelin filed his first patent for a rigid airship, a design featuring a metal framework filled with multiple gas cells, allowing it to maintain shape and stability. In 1898, he founded... I don't think I even want to attempt that one.
Gesellschaft zur Förderung der Luftschifffahrt.
The Society for the Promotion of Airship Travel, to raise funds and develop prototypes. In 1900, the first flight of the LZ-1 took place over Lake Constance. Here, in Germany. Though modest in performance, it proved the concept viable. 1900 through 1910, Zeppelin's designs improved rapidly, leading to longer flights, greater payloads, and growing public enthusiasm. His airships began to attract military interest. In 1910, the
Deutsche Luftschifffahrtsaktiengesellschaft
DLAG was founded. The world's first commercial airline, using Zeppelin airships for passenger travel across Germany, which were domestic only until World War I, with no transatlantic service until after the war ended. DLAG operated several airships before World War I, including the Deutschland and Sachsen, carrying over 34,000 passengers by mid-1914. There are going to be a lot of German pronunciations in this video. I'm sorry for all of them. Zeppelin's rigid airship concept became the blueprint for all future dirigibles, including the Graf Zeppelin and the Hindenburg. Though he died in 1917, his company, Luftschiffbau Zeppelin, LZ for short, continued building airships that defined civilian aviation in the interwar years. His name became synonymous with the entire genre. Zeppelin is still used today to refer to rigid airships, regardless of builder. By the time World War I broke out, Germany had around 10 Zeppelins. However, by the end of the war, 67 had been built. Zeppelins were used for reconnaissance and bombing, especially over Britain. Their high altitude gave early immunity, but they became vulnerable as fighter aircraft and anti-aircraft defenses improved, and hydrogen, which was used for lift, was dangerously flammable. Many were shot down or lost in storms. Still, the war proved that airships could go the distance. They weren't just novelties, they were strategic tools. And that did scare the Allies. When the guns finally fell silent in 1918, the victors didn't just redraw borders, they grounded an entire nation's air force. Under the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was forbidden from building military aircraft of any kind. No fighters, no bombers, no reconnaissance planes, nothing. The Allies insisted on stifling German military might. Article 198 demanded Germany dismantle its air arm. Article 202 banned production. By 1920, the skies over Europe belonged exclusively to the French, the British, and the Italians. But, and this is where my interest comes into the picture, not just passing historical accounts, talented engineers and financiers saw an unexpected loophole. Civilian airships. Germany had been using small airships for passenger travel already. The treaty prohibited military craft, but not civilian. Why build weapons when you can build passenger liners? In the sky. This is where Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin's successors pivoted, notably by a man named Hugo Eckener. Born 1868 in Flensburg, Germany, Eckener earned a doctorate in experimental psychology before working as a journalist. Psychology and journalism. That tracks. He first encountered airships while reporting on Count Zeppelin's early flights. Initially skeptical, he was won over by Zeppelin's vision and joined the company in 1908 as a publicist, later becoming a full-time member. Eckener earned his airship pilot license in 1911 and quickly became a skilled captain. I do try not to use Wikipedia for every bit of information you see, but it is right here. During World War I, Eckener played a crucial but behind-the-scenes role in Germany's airship operations. He was not permitted to fly combat missions, despite being a licensed and skilled airship pilot. Instead, he was considered too valuable, and helped train most of Germany's airship pilots. After Count Zeppelin's death in 1917, Eckener took over Luftschiffbau Zeppelin, steering it through the post-war restrictions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. Several successful airships were built in the interwar years. The LZ-120 Bodensee, the LZ-121 Nordstern, the LZ-126, later renamed the USS Los Angeles, and the Graf Zeppelin and Hindenburg. These civilian airships boasted spacious dining rooms, private cabins, panoramic windows, running water, and sometimes even pianos. While aeroplanes rattled passengers with engines beneath their feet, Zeppelins glided almost silently, offering a luxury that even ocean liners envied. After World War I, most nations abandoned airships or shifted entirely to military use. But Germany, despite its defeat and the restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles, quietly began rebuilding its airship ambitions, with a focus not on war, but on civilian transport. DLAG, Germany's pre-war passenger airship company, resumed operations in the 1920s after having been requisitioned by the German military during World War I. During this period, Hugo Eckener oversaw the construction of the LZ-120, the Bodensee, which I'm probably mispronouncing, which apparently translates to Lake Constance, and the LZ-121, the Nordstern, which apparently translates to North Star. Both designed for passenger service. The Bodensee, or the Bodensee, flew regular routes between Friedrichshafen and Berlin, even reaching Stockholm. It was fast, quiet, and quite popular with travellers. But under Allied pressure, both ships were confiscated. The Bodensee was handed to Italy and the Nordstern to France as part of war reparations. Throughout the 1920s, Germany remained the only country actively developing airships for civilian use. Britain's R-33 and R-34 were military designs used for training and long-distance scouting. The US focused on naval airships, while France and Italy built rigid airships primarily for colonial surveillance and propaganda. By the mid-1920s, Germany's meteorological services began offering tailored forecasts for airship routes, enhancing safety and enabling more reliable scheduling for transcontinental flights for those like the Graf Zeppelin. The LZ-120 completed over 100 flights and logged over 50,000 kilometers before being handed over to Italy in 1921. It carried a little under 2,500 passengers during its time in German service. The LZ-121, Nordstern, completed in 1920, had limited operational use before its transfer to France. From what I can find, doesn't really have any confirmed passenger totals. The sheer novelty of Zeppelin flights boosted tourism and goodwill, drawing international curiosity tours that pumped revenue into Weimar Germany's struggling economy. By operating within the civilian classification, Germany retained skilled aeronautical engineers, mechanics, and pilots, paving the way for rapid expansion of airship and heavier-than-air industries once restrictions eased. In this golden age of airships, mooring towers were essential for docking these massive craft. The most famous was at Lakehurst Naval Air Station in New Jersey. Here. In the United States. A location we will revisit a few times. These towers were designed to anchor the nose of the airship, while ground crews stabilized the tail. In a bold move to embrace the future of airship travel, the Empire State Building was originally designed with a 200-foot mooring mast atop its spire. The idea was to allow transatlantic airships to dock directly above Manhattan, letting passengers disembark via gangplank and descend into the city within minutes. On paper, it was a perfect idea, a dazzling vision of modernity, but ultimately impractical. Despite their ability to ascend to great altitudes, airships are extremely sensitive to wind during docking, due to their low maneuverability and massive surface area. In other words, they are fat. Docking an airship is a lot like trying to anchor a massive boat in a windy harbour. The challenge isn't flying, or, in this analogy, floating. It's being stationary and precise in an environment that is constantly shifting. Air currents at the altitude of the Empire State Building were dangerously unpredictable, and the logistics of safely mooring a hydrogen-filled dirigible above a bustling city proved too risky. Although one small airship briefly docked in 1931 for just 3 minutes, the concept was abandoned. Which is a shame, because it really was a cute plan. Though the mast never fulfilled its lofty promise, it remains a relic of an era intoxicated by the idea of effortless sky travel, a towering symbol not of conquest, but of connection. And while New York dreamed of docking airships above its skyline, Germany was already making that dream real. Rewinding a little bit to 1928, the Graf Zeppelin took flight, and the golden age of civilian airships truly began. The LZ-127, the Graf Zeppelin, named after Count Ferdinand Adolf Heinrich August Graf von Zeppelin. At 775 feet, she was, at the time, the world's largest flying machine. She kicked off with regular transatlantic service, carrying nearly 24 passengers and a crew of around 40 in regal comfort. The first international flight for the Graf Zeppelin happened October 1928 from Friedrichshafen to Lakehurst, New Jersey, commanded by none other than Hugo Eckener. This flight marked the beginning of Graf Zeppelin's legendary career in both transatlantic travel and epic once-in-a-lifetime voyages. Bolstered by her triumphs and public enthusiasm, in August 1929, less than a year later, Graf embarked on the world's first circumnavigation of the globe by airship. Not the first circumnavigation by air, mind you. The previous record for circumnavigation by air was held by the US Army Air Service using Douglas World cruisers. As pictured. It took them 175 days total, through April 6th to September 28th, 1924. They had to make 74 stops total across 5 continents. But it was the first successful circumnavigation by air. The Graf Zeppelin took off on her attempt August 7th, 1929, and commanded by none other than Hugo Eckener. She only made 3 stops on her journey, not 74. She took off from Lakehurst, New Jersey, and travelled first to Friedrichshafen, Germany, a route they were quite familiar with. Then, Friedrichshafen to their second stop, Tokyo, Japan, via Russia and Siberia. Then their third stop, Tokyo to Los Angeles, California. It was also the first non-stop Pacific crossing by air, by the way, a little under 6,000 miles in a little under 80 hours. And finally, Los Angeles back to the finish line at Lakehurst. Each port on her journey greeted by cheering crowds and ticker tape parades. It took them 21 days. They beat the US Army Air Service time by 5 months. The flight itself was sponsored by one William Randolph Hearst, a media mogul who built the largest newspaper and magazine empire in the United States, founding Hearst Communications, which owned several newspapers and the Cosmopolitan and Good Housekeeping magazines. For the sponsorship, he insisted that the flight begin in the United States, so that he could claim it as an American achievement. The move did indeed allow American media to frame the journey as a triumph of US aviation, even though the airship, the crew, and command were entirely German. Hugo Eckener was at the helm for the entire journey, commanding the crew and managing logistics across multiple continents. They also had a civilian crew during the journey, marking a shift from military conquest to peaceful exploration. And on the note of exploration, Graf also made a trip to the Arctic, commanded by none other than Hugo Eckener. This guy shows up a lot. Its route took it over the Barents Sea, reaching as far north as 82 degrees latitude, then eastward across the Russian Arctic. The expedition helped redraw maps of the Barents Sea and contributed to early understanding of Arctic meteorology. Graf made several flights all around Europe, and even made a couple to the Middle East. She ended her career having made 590 flights. She flew around 1.7 million kilometers and carried over 13,000 passengers with a perfect safety record. And here is where we move on from the 127 to the LZ-129, otherwise known as the Hindenburg. We will get to the disaster, but her successes are often glossed over. The LZ-129, the Hindenburg. She was the largest airship ever built, a real marvel of engineering and luxury that symbolized the peak of lighter-than-air travel. Measuring 804 feet in length and 135 feet in height, it was nearly as big as the Titanic, and about as long as 3 Boeing 747s lined nose to tail. And if you want a ridiculous vertical comparison, tipping her 90 degrees makes her about as tall as the towers on the Golden Gate Bridge. She's a big girl. She was powered by 4 Daimler-Benz diesel engines, each producing around 1,100 horsepower, and had the gas capacity of over 7 million cubic feet. She could carry up to 72 passengers and a crew of around 60, offering a near 1-to-1 service ratio. Inside the Hindenburg featured 2 passenger decks, located just aft of the control gondola. Amenities included a promenade deck with panoramic windows, dining room with kitchen, a smoking room ingeniously pressurized to prevent hydrogen leakage, and a lounge with a baby grand piano made of aluminium. Cabins were compact, but comfortable, resembling sleeper train compartments with 2 berths and a wash basin with running water. A rare luxury in air travel during the 1930s. They did not have private bathrooms, however. In a wild plan to conserve weight and space, toilets, urinals, and a single shower were located on Deck B, 1 level below the main passenger deck. My heavens, only 1 shower? With running heated water? Goodness, how utterly pedestrian. Like, can you imagine boarding a plane to go to, I don't know, Comic-Con or something, and then an hour into the flight just stand up and go, "Ooh, I'm hungry, let's go to the restaurant. After we can chill in the lounge listening to the dulcet tones of a fucking grand piano. And then we'll retire to our private cabins." No. Apparently we've decided to stick with being crammed like sardines in a can for 16 hours. The Hindenburg successes, though shorter-lived, were equally dazzling. Over her 14-month career, she completed 63 flights, logged more than 300,000 kilometers, and routinely crossed the North Atlantic in around 60 hours, setting new standards, at the time, for speed and comfort. And while most people associate the Hindenburg with its transatlantic runs to New Jersey, she also made several voyages to South America. Specifically, to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The route was longer and more complex than the North Atlantic crossing. Departing from Frankfurt, the Hindenburg would fly south over Europe, skirt the coast of Africa, and then cross the Atlantic diagonally, touching down in Rio after roughly 60 to 70 hours in the air. That's nearly 10,000 kilometers, give or take, depending on wind conditions. And what a way to arrive! Descending over the lush Brazilian coastline, the massive silhouette of the airship casting a shadow over the city as the locals gathered to watch the floating liner dock. It's hard to imagine it wouldn't have been a spectacle. Part aviation and part theatre. And theatre it was. In the summer of 1936, Berlin hosted the Olympic Games, a global event steeped in spectacle, politics, and propaganda. And soaring above it all, quite literally, was the Hindenburg. And yes, I am aware of the less savoury figures who were in attendance, and the prominent markings on the Hindenburg herself. This story isn't about them, but it is hard to ignore them entirely. I'll touch on them later, because while they didn't build the airship industry, they certainly helped dismantle it. But amid the political theatre, the Hindenburg's role in the Olympics was clear: to impress and inspire. On August 1st, during the opening ceremony, the airship made a dramatic flyover of the Olympic Stadium. Thousands of spectators craned their necks as the massive silvered hull glided overhead. It wasn't just a technical feat, it was a symbol. Germany's technical prowess was on full display. But for many watching, the moment transcended politics. It was awe-inspiring, a machine of impossible scale, floating silently above a massive crowd. Cameras flashed, newsreels rolled, and the Hindenburg became part of Olympic history. During her life in service, she carried around 2,800 passengers. And how much would a trip on her cost, you might ask? Well, ticket prices ranged from 400 to 700 Reichmarks. Reichmarks, I have no idea how to pronounce that one. As you can see, 450 equates to about $7,000 today. 7,000. This is one way, by the way. This made each crossing a highly lucrative affair, and cementing the Hindenburg's reputation as the pinnacle of luxury travel. And it is obvious that airship travel wasn't accessible to the working class at that price. Particularly the Hindenburg herself. Luxuries tend to be more accessible over time with cheaper production and competition. But the civilian airships didn't really have the chance to be anything less than luxury commodities. This is because, just like the sudden tone shift here in this video, the applause hadn't even faded before the fires began. On the evening of May 6, 1937, the skies above Lakehurst Naval Air Station were filled with anticipation. The Hindenburg approached its mooring mast around 7 p.m. The weather had delayed her arrival. The thunderstorms earlier in the day had only cleared hours before. Then, without warning, disaster struck.
Get out of the way, please.
A sudden explosion near the tail end of the airship sent flames racing through its hydrogen-filled interior. Within seconds, the silvery envelope collapsed, and the Hindenburg plunged to the ground in a fiery heap. Spectators watched in horror as the inferno consumed the ship. Radio reporter Herbert Morrison, witnessing the event live, cried out the now famous words,
All the humanity and all the bad screaming around.
Of the 97 people on board, 36 perished. 13 passengers, 22 crew, and 1 ground crew member. Miraculously, 62 survived. many by leaping from the burning wreckage through the panoramic windows as the airship crashed. The cause of the disaster has been debated for decades. While early theories included sabotage, most experts now agree that leaking hydrogen was ignited by a static spark, likely triggered by the damp weather from the poor weather hours before, and the ship's landing ropes grounding the frame unevenly. And I will point out that the Hindenburg did have a pressurized smoking room, but that was ruled out as the cause of the fire, especially as the fire broke out at the rear of the craft. That, and the fact that the room never caused any problems on her many trips before the incident. Though airships were once symbols of progress and elegance, their fragility, reliance on volatile gases, and vulnerability to weather made them dangerous. And the Hindenburg's fiery end was not the first. The LZ-18 in 1913 had 28 fatalities. The Roma in 1922 had 34 fatalities. The R-38 in 1921 had 44 fatalities. The R-101 in 1930 had 48. The Dixmude in 1923 had 52, and the USS Akron in 1933 had 73. There had been several disasters by the time the Hindenburg disaster occurred in 1937 that resulted in far greater fatality counts, but it was the Hindenburg that caught the most attention. And the reason for that might have been the fact it was a civilian vehicle. Most other disasters, no matter what happened to military and government craft. Those disasters were framed within the context of service and duty. While all loss of life is morbid, death in military service, for better or for worse, is expected. The loss of 73 lives aboard the USS Akron, a military craft, while all were mourned, never stopped airship progress and public sentiment. The UK's R101 was intended for civilian passenger service, but it was mostly government operated. Its disaster was viewed as a bureaucratic failure, not a public one. The Hindenburg, by comparison, was a civilian craft. Suddenly, the safety risk wasn't theoretical, it was personal. The public saw themselves in the passengers, and the spectacle of the disaster made it impossible to ignore. Though it wasn't the deadliest airship accident, it was the most visible, the most visceral, and the most public. And in the aftermath, attention turned to the one element that made such destruction possible: hydrogen. A lot of these disasters happened because of the use of hydrogen, which is lighter than air and can have great lifting capacity. But engineers learned the hard way that raw lifting power means nothing if safety is sacrificed. Highly flammable, hydrogen ignites with a single spark. Helium was, and still is, the obvious alternative. Helium is chemically inert. No fire means no explosions, yet still provides about 90% of hydrogen's lifting capacity. That small trade-off in payload is more than worthwhile when every flight can launch and land without fear of combustion. So why was helium not used? Helium was out of reach. In the 1920s and 1930s, the United States held nearly all of the world's helium reserves and tightly restricted its export. Costly to extract and refine, helium simply wasn't available in the quantities or at the price airship pioneers needed. Germany, desperate to keep its Zeppelins aloft, had no choice but to stick with hydrogen, despite the risks. Though, after the Hindenburg disaster, especially after it occurred on US soil, American public opinion shifted dramatically. In 1938, the US Congress amended export restrictions to permit helium sales for non-military airships, hoping to prevent future tragedies, which mostly would have covered German craft, as most others were military. It's also worth noting where Hugo Eckener was at this point. By the time the Hindenburg was launched in 1936, Eckener had been largely sidelined by the Nazi regime due to his outspoken opposition to their policies. In fact, Eckener was in Graz, Austria, when he received news of the Hindenburg disaster in May 1937. And he later participated in the investigation of the Hindenburg disaster, concluding that a static spark was the cause of the catastrophic fire. Despite being sidelined, Eckener remained committed to the future of airships, advocating for their survival even as political tides turned against him. In May 1938, he met with President Roosevelt to discuss the possibility of exporting helium to Germany for use in civilian dirigibles. Ever to be the man hands-on, Hugo played a modest but meaningful role in influencing the US Congress's decision to amend helium export restrictions. Eckener argued that Germany's airships were intended for peaceful, commercial purposes, not military use, and warned that without helium, the future of airships was doomed. He wasn't entirely wrong. Though still expensive, the policy change for helium allowed Germany's next Zeppelin, the LZ-130, Graf Zeppelin II, to be designed for helium lift, until geopolitical tensions and the onset of World War II intervened. Though the US amended its helium export restrictions, once Nazi Germany annexed Austria in March 1938, the US government withdrew that offer and refused export licenses. Considering the previous topic, this makes the timeline a bit funky. Nazi Germany annexed Austria in March 1938. Hugo visited the US after this happened in May 1938. Which was when he secured a promise from President Roosevelt that the US would supply helium for peaceful purposes only. Which would mean that Hugo petitioned Roosevelt for helium after Nazi Germany annexed Austria. Which also means that Hugo managed to get a promise from the president after the US embargo. Clearly, the onset of World War II meant that the promise was never kept. But I do commend Eckener's diplomatic efforts to get even that far. With no domestic helium source and a shipment embargo in place, the Graf Zeppelin II had no choice but to inflate its gas bags with hydrogen, and thus never carried commercial passengers. The Graf Zeppelin II enjoyed only a fleeting career. After her maiden flight, September 14, 1938, she completed just 30 sorties over an 11-month span, none carrying paying passengers. Many of those flights served propaganda or radio survey roles rather than commercial transport. With Europe hurtling towards war, and Germany in urgent need of aircraft materials, the Graf Zeppelin II was dismantled April 1940. its duralumin framework recycled for Luftwaffe production, bringing its life to a premature end. So, yeah, Nazis, along with other more notable and important points, also cost us airships. And save a few novelties, that's pretty much where airships ended. The Hindenburg disaster was a deadly setback for the industry. But after the incident, the US was offering helium. If the Nazis hadn't done what they did, there is a chance that airships could have survived, maybe even thrived. And of course, I don't want to make light of the far greater loss, the millions of lives destroyed by war and genocide. That tragedy overshadows everything. But in this narrow context, it's striking how even peaceful technologies were casualties of the era. After World War II, Hugo Echner lived quietly in Friedrichshafen, the city that had long been the heart of German airship innovation. Despite his earlier efforts to revive airship travel, including a failed post-war collaboration with Goodyear Zeppelin, no new rigid airships were built under his guidance. In November 1945, Hugo Echner was accused of collaboration with Nazi Germany by the French occupying authorities, who fined him 100,000 Reichmarks. The charge was controversial, given Echner's well-documented opposition to the Nazi regime. He had been considered a national hero, and was even floated as a potential candidate to run against Adolf Hitler in the 1932 presidential election. An idea that infuriated the Nazis and ultimately led him to being sidelined in the years that followed. The fine was widely seen as overzealous, but any opposition to it was quietly ignored. After circumnavigating the globe and travelling to the Arctic, he spent his final years as the head of a machine factory. Far removed from the diplomatic missions he once led, or the grandeur of the Graf Zeppelin. History rarely offers clean endings. Echner's legacy, like the airships he championed, floats somewhere between triumph and turbulence. Echner died on August 14th, 1954, at the age of 86. I truly believe something useful, romantic, and magical has been ripped from us. All airships fascinate me, but the history of civilian airships fills me with a mixture of inspiration and melancholy. For a time, they were going from strength to strength, growing, improving, becoming more ambitious. I don't think they're niche at all. I believe they could still fit in our contemporary age. Modern attempts to revive airships have surfaced sporadically over the last few decades. Companies like Hybrid Air Vehicles in the UK and LTA Research in the United States have proposed new designs. Sleek, helium-filled giants that promise low emissions, long endurance, and aiming to solve the problems that plagued earlier designs. Yet, despite the promises, few have entered widespread service, let alone civilian use. The challenges are multifaceted. First, there's the issue of scale. Building a passenger or cargo airship requires massive investment. And not just in materials, but in hangars, infrastructure, and specialized crew training. Unlike aeroplanes, airships can't simply land at any airport. They need huge open areas, which admittedly some airports have, but they also require trained ground crews and mooring towers to anchor them safely. And weather conditions that are far more forgiving. Also, filling a single airship with enough helium for 10 tons of cargo would cost tens of millions of dollars at current market rates. Thankfully, helium isn't consumed during flight, so it's a one-time fill and not a recurring cost. So there's that. Then there is speed. In a world accustomed to jet travel, airships are slow. A transatlantic flight that takes 7 hours by plane might take 2 to 3 days by airship. For cargo, that might be acceptable, but for passengers, it's a harder sell. Ironically, we had supersonic passenger planes in Concorde, but apparently we can't have those either. Personally, I wouldn't care for the speed of an airship. I'd want a leisurely cruise. If you board a cruise ship for a holiday, you don't hope it reaches its destination in 8 hours, do you? And perhaps the most important challenge is public perception. The Hindenburg disaster in 1937 cast a long shadow. Though it was caused by flammable hydrogen, a problem modern airships avoid, the image of a burning dirigible falling from the sky remains etched in public imagination. Safety concerns linger, even if they're no longer scientifically justified. Not to mention that airships today are also treated like a fictitious fantasy, something out of a steampunk novel or retro sci-fi. Few people realize just how widespread they once were. Ironically, the very qualities that make airships appealing — low environmental impact, quiet operation, scenic travel — are the same qualities that struggle to find a market in a fast-paced, profit-driven world. Governments have shown interest in modern airships for surveillance, border patrol, disaster relief. No, that one's fine. I like that idea. But for civilians, the dream remains elusive, and probably always will be. Yet, the potential is still there. In an age of climate urgency, airships offer a cleaner alternative to short-haul flights. It's worth remembering that early Zeppelins once carried passengers across Germany with regularity, offering quiet, scenic journeys and working transport that were more than just experiments. Airships could connect remote communities, indeed deliver aid to inaccessible regions, or even serve as airborne cruise ships. Who wouldn't want a slow, majestic journey through the sky for a honeymoon or a vacation? I would. I would absolutely ride them, no question. That's what I want. The entire crux of this video is for me to say I want airships to come back. They are simply cool, and I want to ride them. Breathe. The technology exists. It has for 100 years. The treaties are gone. The embargoes are gone. What's missing is the will, and perhaps the imagination. From patent to passenger, from promise to flame, the story of airships is one of ambition interrupted. And yet, even grounded, they remain a symbol perhaps not of failure, but of what might still be possible. Maybe one day we'll look up again. Not for speed nor necessity, but for wonder. Thank you for sticking around and listening to me ramble about my personal passions. If you enjoyed the video, please feel free to like and drop a comment. I will not say subscribe, because this kind of content is not my usual fare. I mostly make casual gaming videos. So if you're hoping for more presentations like this one might be waiting an awfully long time. That said, I really do appreciate any engagement. And if nothing else, maybe share this with someone who'd find it interesting? You know, I'm genuinely curious how many people got this far in listening to a cartoon avatar talk history and didn't cringe. Or maybe cringed the whole way through. Either way, thank you for giving me your time, and a chance. I hope it was at least entertaining. So So I'll leave it there. Thank you. Good morning, good evening, and good night. You know, I wanted to add some flair to this video, get some licenses for old videos from British Pathé. But they cost a lot of money per video. Not a criticism, by the way. I just underestimated how accessible they were. Maybe one day I'll revisit this, if I have the money to do something grander, which is unlikely, but